Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Devin, and today we're going to be talking about episode 7 of the Showtime series, Let the Right One In. And you're in luck if you haven't seen episode 7 yet. You can actually click the link in the description right now and watch it for free on Showtime. I'll be going through a summary of the show, talking about my favorite parts, and breaking down everything about Ellie's origin story, which we learned in this episode. To start off, keep in mind that this episode takes place 10 years in the past for the entire episode. The opening scene in this episode is a very heartwarming scene with the father, Mark, Ellie, the mother Elizabeth, as well as Zeke. They are sitting down for dinner, and Mark is showing a brand new dish that he hasn't shown the family. Now this to me was a great start to the episode because it really showed how much Ellie and Mark care about each other. It showed the bond between father and daughter, and Ellie guessing all the ingredients in Mark's dish just really was heartwarming. Zeke also talks about the restaurant that he is opening up soon, and this is the restaurant that we've seen throughout the entire series. For a few short minutes, she is left alone in the backyard by Mark and Elizabeth, and this is when the vampire attacks her. She hears the vampire in the trees, and then it jumps down, grabs her, and starts dragging her through the yard. Mark, Elizabeth, and Zeke hear the screams and quickly get to Ellie and are luckily able to save her from going underneath the fence. The vampire tried to drag Ellie and take her, but luckily they were able to get there in time and save Ellie. But she was bleeding profusely from her neck, and she was bitten. At the time, Mark, Elizabeth, and Zeke did not know what bit Ellie, and Zeke called the ambulance and they got her to the hospital. While at the hospital, the doctor explained that her wounds were actually not as bad as they thought they were. They suspected that the animal that bit her was a coyote. The next morning when Ellie wakes up, the sun is creeping through the blinds and it burns her hand. When it burns her hand, she sucks on her hand to suck her own blood, and her mom stops her. She explains that she's starving and feeling weak, and when she is given food, she throws it up. While in the hospital, the doctors are unsure of what animal actually bit Ellie. The doctors explain that the host is actually the cure because they have antibodies against the infection that she has. So if they can find whatever animal bit Ellie, then they can find out what this infection is and get her better. So with animal control, Zeke and Mark go back to the property and investigate the incident. The animal control guy mentions that there has been 10 animal attacks in the last year. But since they live in the city and there are not many animals like this that would cause such a bite and infection like this, he really has no idea what animal bit Ellie. Back at the hospital at night, the four of them begin to pray, and this is when they find out that Ellie is really a vampire. While praying, Zeke notices that Ellie's eyes are glowing, and while her mom is praying and her eyes are closed, Ellie tries to bite her mother. Right before this happens though, Zeke stops her luckily. He tells Elizabeth to get a vial of Mark's blood and feed it to Ellie. And something I loved about this scene is that Zeke knew right away she was a vampire. He knew exactly what to do, and he really helped out here. After she drinks the vial, they all know that she is a vampire now, and they're able to check her out of the hospital. Although the doctors wanted her to stay, Elizabeth worked in the ICU and talked to the doctors and said, "You can't keep my daughter if I don't want her here." Now, Mark, Elizabeth, and Zeke have a huge problem though. They have to figure out how to get Ellie blood. They talk about getting blood from the butcher, Elizabeth talks about stealing blood from the ICU, and they even talk about giving blood themselves. They soon learn though that the butcher idea would not work because animal blood does not feed Ellie. She needs human blood. The next scene is one of my favorite from the episode, and that is when Ellie goes home. When Ellie enters into her home, she begins shaking and bleeding from her eyes, from her head, all over her body, and they don't know what's wrong. And once again, Zeke comes to save the day, and he must know a ton about vampires because he tells Ellie that she is welcome and she gets better. There's a vampire's rule that they must be told that they are allowed into a house, or else I guess this happens. Zeke explains that they must give Ellie fresh blood that is less than an hour old, or else she will not be fed. Mark remembers that the doctor said if they can find the host, they can find the cure, and this is how they plan to save Ellie. So at night, Mark and Zeke go investigating. They search their property around the neighborhood and discover a sewer grate that is under the fence next to their property in a little alley. Mark and Zeke enter the sewer gate where they find a bunch of tunnels. In one of the tunnels, there are hundreds of cockroaches, and in an eerie scene, Mark and Zeke crawl through this really tight tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, they realize that this leads to a train tunnel which leads into the city. It is here that they discover the sad truth, and that is that the vampire that bit Ellie is probably long gone in the city somewhere, or could be even out of the city by now. Mark and his wife Elizabeth have a very heart-to-heart conversation when he shares the news. Elizabeth explains the sad reality also, and that is that Ellie needs 1 liter of blood every other day in order to survive. And even if Zeke, Mark, and Elizabeth wanted to give Ellie their blood, they couldn't. The human body just does not replenish blood as fast as Ellie needs. Elizabeth says that Ellie has about 2 to 3 months to live. It is here where Mark recalls that the animal control guy said that there were 10 animal attacks in the last year in the area. He goes investigating these attacks, and one of the doors he knocks on is Claire. Claire, who we know from the series, believed at the time that her brother had been killed by a bear, but in reality, he was really bitten by a vampire and the father was covering it up. But before Mark can really talk to Claire much more, the dad comes and shuts the door behind her. After having no luck and starting to lose hope, Mark has a very sinister idea. He talks to Zeke and tells him that there are sex offenders and other criminals in the city that they can kill in order to feed Ellie. Zeke thinks this is the worst idea ever and is disgusted by it and calls in Elizabeth. And Elizabeth isn't against it and is actually on Mark's side. It is here where Mark and Zeke get into a massive fight and he tells him that he is no longer welcome in his house. And I feel that these characters really did care about each other, but at this point Mark and Elizabeth just wanted their daughter back. And it shows that they would do anything to protect their daughter and keep her safe. I really love Zeke in this episode because I feel like it gave us a lot of answers to his character of why he loves Ellie so much, how he became so close with Mark, and it was really because he was there from the start and he saw what happened to Ellie and how it changed Mark and Elizabeth. Elizabeth and Mark come up with a plan for Mark to go and kill one of the sex offenders, and that is what he does. Mark, who had been stalking the guy for a few weeks, enters into his home, and when the guy gets home, Mark kills him after a brief struggle. Mark now has a rush against the clock as he has to get home under an hour to get Ellie the blood. But Mark's car does not start at first, and when it finally starts, he is in such a rush that he gets into a car accident. Mark knows that he has to get home as soon as possible, tells the guy he'll give him his insurance, whatever he needs, but he has to go because there's an emergency. Mark tries to explain that he has to get home, but the cops don't let him. Because of this incident, Mark got holed up over an hour, and when he gets home, Elizabeth and him are both devastated because the blood is no longer fresh. And he had just killed a man now for no reason. He tells Elizabeth that he'll go out and kill another man right now, but she tells him no. Mark goes into the kitchen while Elizabeth goes upstairs to talk to Ellie, who is starving, weak, and dying in her bed. Now the next scene is my favorite scene from the entire series thus far, and that is when Elizabeth gives up her life for Ellie. In a heartfelt mother and daughter moment, she talks to Ellie about what she believes heaven is. After this conversation, she grabs a knife that she brought upstairs with her and slices her arm to let Ellie feed. Before Mark realizes the knife is gone and barges into the room, his wife is dead and Ellie is no longer starving. Elizabeth had given up her life for her daughter, who she didn't want to see suffer anymore. And this really surprised me because watching the series so far through episode 7, I thought that Elizabeth maybe died from maybe a sickness, something happened, but I didn't expect her to give up her life. And to me, this is one of the most important scenes in the entire series as well. This scene just shows so much about the character of Mark. Mark most likely feels a ton of pressure because his wife gave up her life. He feels the responsibility to take care of Ellie and make sure she is safe, get her fed, and keep her alive. He knows that this is what his wife would have always wanted. And this is honestly how he justifies his actions of putting himself in danger while also killing people, committing crimes for his daughter. The justification is because he wants to make Ellie and his wife proud. Now this series is great so far and I cannot wait to see where the rest of the story goes. So let me know in the comments what you have thought of the Showtime series, Let the Right One In so far, and if you haven't seen episode 7 yet, like I said in the beginning of the video, you can click the link in the description to go watch the video for free on Showtime. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again in the next video.